councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is the end of diplomacy. 35 minutes. That's all, Marco.
Howdy, it is Ryan and Yelena, and for a strategic discussion, strategic update from the very hot Florida, Larry Johnson. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to everybody.
Staying cool, it's summer.
Exactly. And Yelena, she has some camera problems, but we can hear her loud and clear. Well, what I think that today I wanted to kind of broadly talk about, and I think Yelena agrees, is empty threats versus real threats, because it increasingly seems like there are two systems, a real dichotomy, not left versus right, not socialism versus capitalism, not liberal versus conservative. These are false dichotomies, but really systemic issues that we can be looking at. A system that, people think about George Soros, Klaus Schwab, these guys, where it is a system that demands obedience and control, and a system that recognizes maybe that we have differences, but we can coexist. So I thought the best way to take that broad idea is to go to the very courageous and very tough Scott Bessent, also the very flamboyant, and take some words from him and then get your comments, Larry. Here is the first one.
At President Trump's direction, the United States Treasury has begun Operation Economic Outcast, an unprecedented campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran and its enablers. In the Second World War, D-Day marked the historic beginning of a campaign with our allies to target and drive the enemy from its positions, including those in third countries. Today, in that same spirit, we are launching an economic onslaught against Iran's financial connections around the globe. Our objective is to sever every economic lifeline that sustains this tyrannical regime until Tehran stands alone. It is making phone calls to world leaders with specific requests to cease their interactions with the regime. We are already seeing results. Over the weekend, comments from Iranian leadership clearly acknowledged the effect of this campaign, and nations that facilitate any interactions with the regime should quickly heed our message. Those who stand with the United States will reap the rewards of our partnership. Those who tether themselves to the Iranian regime should expect to share in the isolation of a withering regime.
All right, that's 100 nations, but here's the kicker, and then your comments.
You described this as an economic D-Day, but D-Day wasn't a threat of an invasion, and the U.S. didn't give a timeline to Germany. So why not impose the sanctions today?
Well, we are giving everyone the opportunity to remedy bad behavior. Why would I want to blow up the global financial system?
Oops. He wants to blow up the global financial. Larry, your comments on the courageous and waffling words of Secretary Bessent.
Never cease to be amazed that incredibly stupid people get put in positions of extraordinary responsibility. I mean, Bessent is a genuine moron. You know, he can speak, put a sentence together, but you know, right there, he gave the game up. Well, if we actually do this, we'll blow up the international financial system. Exactly. Which means you'll destroy the United States. So this was, you know, you'd probably get a YouTube strike if you played it, but I'd cue up Peggy Lee's famous song, "Is That All There Is?" You know, is that all there is? You know, because you listen to what he said and then what they're actually going to do. And what it boils down to is, by God, if you are trading dollars with Iran, we're going to punish you. And what's Iran doing? They're not trading in dollars. They're trading in Chinese yuan. So, you know, they're not really going to be bothered. These sanctions, if implemented, would target 3 countries: China, Pakistan, and Turkey. Turkey gets a substantial amount of its gas from Iran, as does Pakistan. And that's an item that you just don't go out and say, well, you know, we'll go find an alternative down at a Walmart or Costco. I'm sure there's another brand. No, there's not another brand. There's not another source of supply they can readily turn to. So this essentially Bessent making threats against countries, number one, that are buying, you know, they're not transacting in dollars, they're transacting in Chinese currency, which then limits the effect. If your sanctions are in dollars, this makes it a little difficult to put pressure on somebody that's using a foreign currency. And yet he doesn't acknowledge that. And he really steers clear of China, because Xi Jinping's showing up in 2 or 3 weeks. And the Chinese have already made it clear they view these sanctions as illegal. Illicit was the word they used. So it's just the divorce from reality is stunning.
Yeah, actually, the Financial Times reports that China is therefore considering retaliatory actions and sanctions in response. Their foreign minister discussed this yesterday. And you frequently talk about, I think his name is Kevin Walmsley.
Kevin Walmsley, yeah, Inside China Business.
Right. Very, you know, it's funny because he's very, I don't know, not emotion. He has no emotion, but the words he says tend to be pretty explosive. So, you know, one thing I saw weeks ago from him, he made a very good point. The BRICS countries are not out to challenge the dollar. That rather they're just going to avoid these sanctions. And I think that's where you're headed with what you're saying, because
right.
SWIFT allows American banks and regulators to see the money flows. But if countries say, well, we're going to not use the SWIFT system, then you know, that disappears. So no seizures, that nations can't be bullied, that just literally sidestep. And that's what I'm saying. Empty threats, because what we're looking at is really the formation of 2 different systems. What do you think of that?
Well, it has the counterproductive, counterintuitive result. Bessent thinks, okay, we're going to force these sanctions, and these people have no alternative, no choice. They've got to surrender to us. But instead, the people say, oh, we absolutely, you know, the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, they say, well, we absolutely do have a choice. We don't have to have any relationship with you whatsoever. You're not selling oxygen. You know, you're not the sole supplier of oxygen in the world. Where if you were, we'd have to stick with you, or else we'd die. No, you're selling cotton candy. We can live without cotton candy. So what it does is inspires these countries to seek alternatives. The sanctions against Russia in 2022 led directly to the expansion of SIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system that China had set up going way back to 2015. But this now gave it further impetus, and now these latest attempts by the United States to bully, coerce, threaten, seize assets is leading more and more countries. There are at least 100 countries now that are using SIPs, and more are going to turn to it, and they're going to start saying, if we hold the dollar, the United States can use that dollar against us. They can seize it. They can take it. So we need to get away from the dollar.
So is that one reason why also Bessent he did this doubling of the buyback of treasuries, which, I mean, I don't get, frankly, how you can threaten countries and then say, but we have to be your piggy bank. We have to be, right? So it's like two things at once. And then I just read in the World Gold Council survey, 45% of central banks say they intend to increase gold holdings. So that's a record. And that gold just continues to become more and more important.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's devaluing the dollar in every sense of the word. Removing incentives for people to hold dollars, removing incentives for people to buy dollars, removing any incentive for people to hold their assets in a dollar account, and moving into banks that offer alternatives. So, I mean, this is, it's just Bessent's approaches to this are just so tone deaf. Now, I suspect he's doing it with the full encouragement, support of Trump, but it's up to him to go propose something smarter, and he should have explained to Trump. I don't know if anybody's explained to him that, hey, when China sells a barrel of oil, it doesn't touch one single dollar. It sells it. The Chinese pay yuan for it, and then Iran turns around and deposits that in the Chinese bank. So the notion that Iran is stuck in the past. 2 years ago they were using banks in the UAE that had dollar accounts and that the United States could access and control. Not now. And the really interesting thing is, the narrative is, our sanctions are crushing Iran. Look at their GDP. It's half of what it was. Well, there's this thing called purchasing power parity, where you look at the GDP and measure it in terms of what can people actually buy for their particular currency. Turns out that after years of intense sanctions going back to JCPOA in 2015, Iran's economy has grown by like 30%, according to PPP. So significant difference. The fact of the matter is just showing that the sanctions are ineffective.
So my understanding of PPP, if you take say more about that, is that their money buys more for them, so that they make less per, let's say like an individual, but they can get more goods and services or whatever that they need to exist.
Yeah, it's just so you say, the U.S. dollar is strong, and with $1 million, I can buy a 3,000 square foot home. That's not nothing to write back home about. It's an average house. Whereas, let's say in Russia, whose currency is, let's say it's 80 rubles to the dollar right now, but you could buy there a 5,000 square foot home for $500,000, the equivalent of $500,000. Well, who's better off? Mm-hmm. Clearly you get more bang for your buck in Russia than you do in the United States. So that's at the heart of this concept of PPP. And when you rank countries according to their gross domestic product based on purchasing power parity, that's where Russia is consistently the number 4th economy in the world. after United States, India, China.
Right, right. Elena, do you have any comments on there? I know you were saying that you had some issue with your microphone, but I wanted to make sure you.
Yeah, I hope my microphone works.
You're good. You're good. You're good.
You know, I'm really afraid to speak and to touch something, but I was we were actually thinking yesterday, what happens if American economy really goes down because of these threats and attitude towards partners, and say we've looked up a little bit how much European central banks holds currency, like currency reserves in dollars, and it is approximately 76% of all currency reserves of European central banks are in US dollars, and 80% or even more, up to 90% is in US bonds. And percentage is even higher for Norway. So if something happens to American economy, and what I hear from Scott Bessent and what I hear from actually speakers who are talking about that interest rates on bond servicing has gone higher than 5%. What's going to happen to European economies if something, God forbid, happens to United States economy?
Well, I mean, the European economies they're in trouble. You know, they're not on a path for economic growth. The debt, they keep running up more and more debt in order just to stay afloat. Look at Germany. Germany used to be notorious for not having debt. Now its debt to GDP ratio is climbing towards 65%. Well, that would have been unheard of 5 years ago. So that the Brits are above, they're in excess of 100%. France is in excess of 100%. I think Italy is too. So, across Europe, you're seeing they're being savaged by much higher prices for diesel, aviation fuel, because there's a global shortage. The United States has been able to insulate itself by still drawing off of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but that's running out. And running out fast, about maybe another month left, and then it's empty.
So talking about these things, you also have what the Trump administration is doing in our hemisphere. With Cuba, there's some things going on there. Maybe you can address. Also, there was this thing about how we're rushing to buy Argentine beef. I guess that's to prop up the Malay government there. Can you address these things? Because again, to me, this seems like, it's this kind of bipolar thing where we're out to attack these guys. We claim we're helping here. It's kind of psychotic, in the Trump administration.
Well, yeah, I think the turn to Argentina, and then they talk about Mexico for beef. Ugh. Mexico has never, anybody that's traveled through Mexico and eaten beef in Mexico, as I have in the past, it's not Mexico, Central America is not the place you go to get a good steak. Okay, they'll put it it's that simple. Argentina, Brazil, oh, absolutely,
yeah,
tremendous steak. I lived in Argentina back in 1983, actually all of 1984, then a little bit into 85. Strangest place because there the beef is cheaper than chicken. Normally up here in the States, your chicken's a cheaper cut of meat than beef. Mm-hmm. Just the opposite down there.
Wow.
Now I've seen there were some articles suggesting that the Argentines inject something in their beef that people say is unhealthy and that is not allowed to be exported. I'm skeptical of that. I suspect that's more just our own beef industry wanting to keep the Argentine beef industry out. The problem is in the United States, the cattle herd for the beef stock, it's gone down, and so fewer cows out there to be slaughtered and turned into a porterhouse or a sirloin. And Florida is a classic example. Florida, 25 years ago, was the number one producer of beef in the United States.
That's shocking.
Yeah, we had more cattle ranches. So when you get down here to like Manatee County, you got all these neighborhoods like Lakewood Ranch, Palmer Ranch. Well, they actually were ranches, and then the owners of those ranches sold out, and then all that ranch land became formerly cattle country, then became new housing developments. There were 100 cattle ranches I live in Manatee County. 25 years ago, there were 100 cattle ranches here in Manatee County. Today, there are 12. So, there you get a reduction in the supply of beef. That's one explanation. Importing cheap Argentine beef is, it's an acknowledgement that they've got an inflation problem with regular beef. I mean, the price of conventional, of American raised beef has gone up significantly. I got these two giant beasts called Rottweilers, and we feed them a raw food diet, which includes raw meat. And we buy them these logs of hamburgers, meat. That's gone from, in the last year and a half, it's gone from $14 up to $22. So that's a significant price rise. So this look the Trump and his economic advisors, they're sitting on a time bomb. They're trying to pretend that the price of gas is not going to keep rising, that diesel's adequately supplied, and just the opposite. They've been able to mask, cover up what's going on in the market because they're drawing up on our own petroleum reserve. But they've now created a new problem for themselves with Canada. Canada has been one of our major suppliers of sour crude. God, I keep getting these people writing to me, "You don't understand. Sour crude just means it has high sulfur." Jesus, folks, I understand that, okay? Stop. The oil is classified sour and sweet, and it's based upon the sulfur content. And it is true that you can produce diesel fuel and aviation fuel out of sweet crude. But you got to have a refinery that can do that. And the problem in the United States is we built refineries that are structured, designed, organized to handle sour crude. So you can't just run sweet crude into it and voila, it won't work. So you got to have the sour crude, which is why the United States has been a net importer of sour crude. And what kind of oil came out of the Persian Gulf? Sour crude. And we used to also buy from Russia prior to 2022 and the start of that war. But what was theirs? Sour crude.
And there's a lot of that sour crude from Canada, and we just dropped sanctions on Canada.
Yeah, in fact, Canada said they're going to stop supplying us 300. We've been getting 300,000 barrels of oil per day. They're cutting that off in next week. So we'll be out. So these refineries are going to be left with Mexico and Venezuela, and the supply of oil. Venezuela is a whole different category. I mean, let's call it super sour. It's just thick. It's almost like tar. And so it requires a lot higher level of processing, cooking, to extract the various products, various chemicals, petrochemicals, oil, diesel, aviation fuel that come out of that. So, the United States is you got Bessent and Rustling trying to protect the dollar, and it's failing. You've got people around the different countries around the world dumping their dollars, not buying U.S. Treasuries, buying gold. So it's a very precarious position economically, and we got political leaders that pretend everything's just hunky dory.
It's funny. One thing that you're talking about Canada here, and I don't get why we decided to put sanctions on Canada, but in Alberta they have an upcoming referendum. Did you hear about that referendum?
Oh yeah, no, I was at a conference in Calgary in March, and it was organized by people who are part of that movement, and even the if you will, the governor of Alberta, she's supportive of this effort. So they really, Alberta basically could secede from the rest of Canada.
Yeah, exactly. There is a referendum on Alberta. I can't remember how it goes, but the idea is secede from Canada, and then that leaves them ready to join the United States, is the claim. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think that's right.
What do you think the chances are of that?
I would say actually there's probably a 70% chance. There seems to be widespread support, at least in Alberta, for that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not sure what steps the rest of the Canadian government could take to try to prevent that. But the certainly, Alberta is sort of, it's cowboy country.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of independent folks. It's got some terrific natural resources, and it's a big supply. I think it's one of the main locations for the oil industry in Canada.
Interesting. Well, so a friend of mine who had pointed this out to me sent me a video from the Canadian news where they brought an American, I forget, American intelligence person, let's just put it that way, from some foundation, not Rand Corporation, but something similar else, where he said, well, this whole thing is being run by Russia. That's what he said. The American line is the whole thing was being run by Russia. But then he was asked on the program about the referendums in Donbass and Crimea, so which he wouldn't answer about that. So I don't know. I just find these things to be interesting because, and I mentioned to you before the show about somebody I've been reading, Einar Tangen, who is, I believe he's a Chinese American, but he's based out of China, the Tai He Institute. And he was saying that these conflicts, the way that the United States is thinking, China is not going to bow down. Russia, I mean, he didn't say this, but we know Russia's not going to bow down. There's going to be, they want a positive relationship, but what he's suggesting is rather than the great power competitions, that we're probably going to have some form of a managed coexistence, some nations having their strengths in certain areas, and that's kind of where it's going to go. It's going to be nation state to nation state. There, I don't want to say spheres of influence, but areas of importance. Now, I'm bringing this up, Larry, because Yelena and I and somebody else were talking before the show about the relations of China and Russia. And we definitely need to get your view on this because certainly they were rivals and even more than rivals in the past, even opponents. But it seems to me that is the more that the United States insists that everybody, or I shouldn't say the United States, more that the Anglo-American financial establishment insists that everybody bow down. It seems like their interests more and more are coherent with each other. And so that I think rivalry, there always will be differences, but the rivalry is not going to be there like in the past. What would you say about that?
Well, yeah, and even the rivalry has been somewhat selective. I mean, that's 85 years ago, during the height of World War II, the Soviet Union, but Russia essentially, was supplying the Chinese, both the Kuomintang and the communists under Mao Zedong,
Right.
with weapons to fight the Japanese. So you had, let's call it, that was an era of cooperation. I've never really looked into why why the frictions developed in the 60s going into the 70s, but clearly the United States under Kissinger said, okay, here's our strategy. We're going to cozy up to China. We're going to woo China, try to court them, see if we can convince them to go out on dates with us, and maybe we can get married, all to split China off from Russia so that Russia and China would not cooperate. And, there were those friction points in the 70s and in the 80s. And that's where, part of that may have been with China's support for Pakistan, Russia's support for China. That may have been one of the, the irritants in the relationship.
Well, I think there was some also because of Chiang Kai-shek versus the communists under Mao Zedong and Zhu De in China, because I can't remember exactly, but the Soviets they didn't like the way that the Chinese communists were implementing communism.
Yeah.
Right. And then there was the question of, like you say, there were sort of the Dulles brothers types on the one side, and then you had the so-called China hands on the other, who said we should work with the Chinese that want to fight. So that was like General Stilwell, John Davies, and they were saying, look, pour everything into Mao Zedong because they're fighting. Right. And then you had these others who were like, well, no, Chiang Kai-shek because he's anti-communist. And so then there was the question of the two types. But it seems to me, again, the way that you see Putin and Xi working together, it's very much different. Plus, China just opened this whole northern Arctic trade route to Europe, and that's really the venue of Russia, the Arctic, with the
I think you mean to say Russia opened it, China's using it.
Well, there you go. I mean, so that's what I'm saying. To me, that is strategic cooperation.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, they've the Kissinger goal of keeping Russia and China separate, basically that seemed to succeed up and through until the presidency of Barack Obama. Now, I'm not sure at what point when we can pinpoint the thaw and the warming of relations, but we can certainly put a definitive date on it in terms of March 2023, when Xi Jinping went to Moscow, and he and Putin were hugging it out. So people. Right. You heard some of the aides saying, "Hey guys, get a room,"
And also in this year, the Russians have acknowledged the contribution of the Chinese to in World War II. That it was the loss, the sacrifice, is as great as what the Russians saw in the East.
That's one thing that we in the West, particularly in the United States, when we make all of our war movies and glorify our own role in that war, ignore the fact that Russia and China combined accounted for about 75% of all the deaths in World War II. Just a phenomenal number. So they paid a much higher price. And then the fact that the Chinese, that during the war in the Pacific, the Chinese kept 70% of the Japanese army tied up on operations on the mainland. Again, that's another fun fact that most Americans don't know or appreciate. So this is we have to deal with where are we now, and where we are now is Russia and China are in a very very intense economic, political, even military relationship. They've agreed to cooperate across all relevant spheres that governments are concerned about. And, it was both Russia and China, Putin for Russia, Wang Yi, the foreign minister for China, that in late April, early May, both said, hey, we need a new security architecture in the Middle East, in West Asia. And I don't think it's a mere coincidence that you've now got Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan having signed this Mecca Accord and inviting in Iran, reportedly inviting in Syria. Bangladesh says, hey, I want to be a part. Egypt, they may become a part. So you could really create a genuine new security architecture that is controlled by Muslims and that excludes the United States.
Well, okay. So that was going to be my next direction, the Mecca Agreement, which I don't really understand. And you already started to say what I was going to ask, which is, could Iran join that? And I want to put as the backdrop that Foreign Affairs came out with an article this week, the end of the American Middle East. And they're saying it's a total failure, what's going on in the Middle East by the United States. And I went and did some digging. Chaz Freeman back in 2019 had a whole speech about how America in the Middle East was failing back then because of a lack of understanding of all these different groups, the Sunnis, the Salafis, Shia. But I want to zero in on this Mecca Agreement because, and have you explain more on this, because I also noticed that in there is the the Baghdad 8th Baghdad Dialogue Conference. The Iraqi president said that Iran has granted permission for several Iraqi oil tankers to pass through the Straits of Hormuz. And so it's like you have a different relationship forming in the Middle East. Iran is recommending Iraq establish a peace treaty with Turkey and the PKK. I mean, so please say more about this Mecca Agreement. I don't understand it, but it definitely seems like what you're saying. The U.S. is somehow being edited out of the Middle East.
Yeah, I think this was a culmination. I'm not sure when it first started, but when Iran's foreign minister Araghchi was in St. Petersburg last week of April, meeting with Putin. Putin came out and said, "Hey, we need a new security architecture in the Middle East, in West Asia." 1 week later, Araghchi is in Beijing meeting with Wang Yi. Wang Yi says the exact same thing as Putin. Then we get the meeting in June where Trump is with the Iranians in Switzerland, or with Trump's negotiators are in Iran, or in Switzerland with the Iranians, and Trump is at the Versailles Palace recreating a shameful moment from World War I when he signs an MOU. But while that meeting is going on in Switzerland, foreign ministers of Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt convened in Cairo. And there was a representative from Iran there as well. See, what were they talking about? Well, they were talking about this new security architecture. So that's when Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan came out 2 weeks ago now and signed that agreement. It was the import of it was where they signed it. They signed it in Mecca. So, if this was just sort of regular doing government business, why didn't they meet in Riyadh? But this was a symbolic declaration, if you will, of unity among Muslims, because the Turks are not Arabs. nor are the Pakistanis. So you've got basically three different ethnic groups, but they're bound together by Islam. Now, Sunni Islam is their flavor, but and that has been one of the issues that the United States has used as a wedge to provoke conflict throughout West Asia, basically claiming Iran's this massive threat, collecting money from the Gulf Arabs, using that money to fund Islamic extremist groups, including ISIS and al-Nusra and others, using those radical extremist groups, not only backing them in Afghanistan in the fight against the Soviets in the 1980s, but continuing to support them in the war in the former Yugoslavia, where radical Islamists were funded. At the same time, funding them going into the Dagestan and Chechnya in Russia. So the Second Chechen War. The West was involved with both of those, using these Islamic extremists to try to weaken both Russia and to weaken Iran. So, with that as a backdrop, particularly the Saudis, I think they're saying, we've been burnt so many times. The United States has promised us security. We've had to buy their bonds. We've had to buy their stinking weapons that don't work. And now they've put us in a place where we're very vulnerable. We're losing money.
Right.
They're losing money every day. So they need to get that turned around. So I think this agreement was a step in that direction. Osman Munir was in Tehran yesterday, reportedly extending a specific invitation to Iran to join the Mecca group. We'll call it the Mecca group for now. And if that's the case, if that happens, that is a game changer, because now no longer is the United States going to be able to claim the Sunnis have to defend themselves from the Shia. You've now got the major Shia country and the major Sunni countries coming together to act as one.
All right. So in the middle of that, of course, people are going to say, well, what about India? Because India has historically, not been very happy about the Muslims. As we know, India has a very good relationship with Russia. There is this, I don't know if I can make this any bigger. Time Magazine recently were saying that there is a faint hope for peace between India and Pakistan. So the question I have on this, further on what you're saying, is because of the working relationship that has improved between Russia and China, because China played a role in the last few years creating treaties between Saudi Arabia and Iran, is it possible that you could actually see, therefore, a changed relationship with India and the Arab world and Pakistan in particular?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's where it's headed. Again, so much of the strife between these countries has been generated by the United States as a deliberate part of its policy. We're a malevolent Conrad Dobler, and people go, okay, who the hell's that? It's an obscure sports reference in the United States. Conrad Dobler was an American football player. He was a lineman, big guy, and he was a notorious dirty player, and he was also known for starting fights. So, like he'd show up and say, "Hey Ryan, did you hear that Lena called your mother a whore?" And then go to Lena and say, "Did you hear what he said about your father?" And get them fighting. Then he'd step back and watch them fight. That's been the United States, where we would deliberately go in and provoke confrontations or fund groups that would carry out attacks to try to destabilize countries. Mm-hmm. And I think a growing number of these countries now are going, wait a minute. Why is the United States always creating these problems? We don't need this. We're we can work. We can talk it out. To quote another Beatles song, we can work it out. And that's, I think, what's starting to take place in the Gulf. That Ghalibaf, the parliamentary speaker in Iran, announced 2 days ago that, the Kuwaitis, the Bahrainis have reached out to him. Hey, why can't we be friends? We can sing that. And so if they're starting to move in that direction, then all of a sudden, again, the rationale for why these countries needed to build up their armies and buy all these U.S. weapons is to protect themselves against Iran, who had absolutely no intention whatsoever of invading or attacking those countries. It was based upon a damn lie. And so, we got the potential here to really see turning a corner in the relations between the states in that area, because again, the West tries to portray that Turkey and Iran are at odds, except the report today is, well, man, Turkey still buys its gas from Iran, so they do have a basis for getting along, and they claimed, Iran launched missiles against Turkey during the first 40 days of the war. No, I bet that was Israel. I don't think that was Turkey at all. Israel trying to make it look like, Israel trying to make it look like it was Iran attacking Turkey.
Well, the whole, and you just, in terms of the region, again, Israel, Turkey, because a number have said, Scott Ritter and others have talked about, the potential and then the not potential that Israel and Turkey would get into a fight with each other. But needless to say, it does seem like all of this is serious diplomacy, which the American population doesn't get to even see. We're still, so we're still thinking, it's the Democrats. What is the thing I saw? Somebody had a meme. The biggest threats of all are Islam and communism, and the Democrats, are using both of them. But it seems like it's far more serious than that. CIA Director John Ratcliffe is in Moscow apparently now. Yelena, you had posted something about that. So it seems like as much as we have the saber rattling, even still with Russia, and we still are supporting the illegal government of Ukraine, we still have to go talk to the Russians. And the Russians are dominating the battlefield in Ukraine. So these diplomatic changes actually make it so that this two systems, right? The idle threats of Bessent are really just to defend a dying system, and there's something else still being formed.
Yeah. No, it is the CIA, I would argue, is on its heels. It's various covert actions, and when you reconstruct the last 40 years, you really see how pernicious, how evil my former employer has been. I wrote a piece last week, about a week ago, published it, on why Iran is not the number one sponsor of terrorism. And then in tracing the who actually is carrying out the terrorist activities, particularly over the last 25 years, well, it's 95% of it are radical Sunnis. And, groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Nusra, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, more recently. And you step back and look at the U.S. policy on the one hand, the public expression, particularly starting in the mid-1990s, we're fighting a war on terror. Now, we always said that the number one
with us or you're with the terrorists.
Yeah, well, right. And we always suggested that the number one terrorist sponsor was Iran, but the groups that were actually carrying out the attacks were these Sunni Salafists. Well, the United States first developed its relationship with them in the 1980s in Afghanistan, because it wasn't just from the Afghan area. It was people came in like bin Laden and others from the outside to fight a holy war against the Soviets. That's where the CIA established relationships and contacts. So as the 1990s progressed, the CIA then turned to them and began funding them for operations in the former Yugoslavia and in Russia, in Chechnya. Again, what was the purpose? The purpose was to, particularly in the Balkans and Chechnya, was to weaken Russia. They were not targeting Iran as much per se in the 1990s. But then as we shift after post 9/11, and let me emphasize that in the 1990s, Bill Clinton signed an intelligence finding. I don't know what the name of it is, but I guarantee you he signed a finding that authorized the CIA provision of this material assistance to these radical Islamists that were carrying out operations in the Balkans. And one of and this also helps explain 9/11, why there was one branch of the CIA that's dealing with the very guys that carried out the attack on 9/11, and there's another element on the operations side of the CIA that had no idea about that. They can't keep those compartmented with right hand not knowing what the left hand's doing. So even after 9/11, and we declared this open war on terrorism, they tried to target it at that point on Iran, even though Iran didn't have a goddamn thing to do with 9/11. Right. And in 2005, according to Seymour Hersh's reporting, George W. Bush signs a new finding, basically just directing money that's going to go to groups that are coming out of the Persian Gulf to go after Iran. Now, again, the Gulf Arabs, the Saudis, Qataris, Kuwaitis, Bahrain, they're funding this. The CIA's come into it and say, hey, here, we need you to, put some money in the hat. And so that's where the CIA interacting with all these Gulf Arabs was using them to get the money off to go and fight, to carry out operations against Iran. And that intensified in 2012 with Operation Timber Sycamore under Obama. So, right. I mean, the point here is it's been bipartisan, Republican, Democrat alike.
Exactly.
But there's been this intense intelligence activity, basically enabling, supporting radical Islamic terrorism that has been funded by the Saudis and other Persian Gulf allies. So now that brings us back to where we start talking about this New Mecca agreement. I think, frankly, they're tired of this. They're tired of being used as pawns, and they may want it to stop. And that we'll see if I don't have any illusions that this is not going to be easy, and there's significant obstacles. And the U.S. will do whatever it can to sabotage it and throw a monkey wrench or a hand grenade into the mix. But if it continues the way it appears to be, this could be a real game changer.
Well, this person buried in the sand from Rumble asked the question literally, so what does this say about the future of the CIA? The start of so-called mini color revolutions in small town America, these manipulations. Definitely want to get your thinking, what does this mean for that? And the reason I want to ask the same question is that the Telegraph, Reuters, the Financial Times are claiming, but that the anti-cyber unit of the British government, or MI5 or MI6 has discovered that the Iranians attacked a small UK power plant it was not a big deal, but this is like a big thing. And then they also say at the same time, yeah, but nobody's admitted, they have no proof to say that this is actually. I mean, what do you say in terms of the CIA and all of these kinds of things and psychological warfare, hacking, etc.? Is this all going on the way that we are being told?
Well, not the way we're being told, but the CIA activities in this trying to destabilize Russia, destabilize China, destabilize Iran. They're not going to lay off that at all.
Mm-hmm.
They'll continue until at some point Congress needs to step in and just cut off the funding, take the organization apart. It needs to stop because it really is a malevolent influence. It's not an influence for peace, democracy, justice. Just the opposite. It really is. It's a corrupt institution, and that basically, if you're a genuine psychopath, you're going to do well in the CIA.
Mm.
And that's why they've had a few of those characters. James Jesus Angleton being, one of the more visual examples.
Right. And somebody that a lot of Americans don't know about is that guy right there, James Jesus Angleton. Really a very bad spy figure. So again, this comes back to, because I know we're coming up on the hour, we have empty threats from Scott Bessent that are not really we're not going to be able to deal with when we have $40 trillion of debt. And we have the world moving increasingly into two different systems. And the other person I want to just point to, Alex Craner. Maybe you know him.
I know Alex. Yeah.
Yeah, he's had a series recently on this very question, that you really have a British imperial system, which currently the United States largely seems to be the continuation of. And frankly, I don't even think Trump is aware of it. Other people make those decisions and his mouth changes moment to moment. And you have the question of whether we're going to have that, or if we're going to have a national development, which is what we see increasingly in Russia. We see this with China. It seems that Iran wants that kind of stability. And from what you've said, that all of these countries around this Mecca agreement, they're basically saying the same thing. We want some form of stable economy and a break from perpetual war. So thank you, Larry, for some of that analysis. I think this is just something Americans, maybe Western Europeans, they just don't get this. They're thinking in imperial terms and they don't even realize it.
Yeah. I mean, I always like to reference that movie Angel Heart with Robert De Niro, Mickey Rourke, because I'd argue the United States is the Mickey Rourke character. In this movie, Mickey Rourke is hired by a guy called Louis Cypher.
Oh, yes.
Well, Louis Cypher, if you say it fast, is Lucifer. So really, Robert De Niro was playing the devil. And the devil was hiring Mickey Rourke to look for this guy who'd committed all these murders. And what you don't find out to the end of the movie is Mickey Rourke is looking for himself. He is the murderer. And that's the big reveal at the end of the movie. And that's the United States. We keep looking for this murderer, these bad guys in the world. We're the friggin' bad guy, okay? I'm not happy about saying that because, I know the average American does genuinely hold good intentions in wanting to deal with the rest of the world.
I agree.
But we keep getting sold a line of bullshit about foreign threats, and Iran's the number one sponsor of terrorism, which is just a goddamn lie. It is absolutely not true, provably not true. But yet Americans get sold that, believe it, and act on it. And then when you show them the definition of terrorism, which is the use of violence against civilians for political purposes, well, who's got the biggest number of civilian casualties in the last 60 years? Us, the United States. when you stack up the civilians that died, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, throughout Africa, Somalia, throughout Central America, throughout Asia, through Syria, through Iraq, through Iran, Afghanistan. I mean, the numbers are staggering, and yet, we happily go around pretending like we're the brokers of peace when it's just the opposite.
Yes, yes. All right. Well, and I'm thinking of the movie always, Idiocracy. Brando, it's what plants crave. And but we don't have a flunky private to come and show us yet some intelligence. So, that's how I see it right now. Idiocracy.
Well, yeah. Well, thanks for having me today. Send me the link.
Larry. Yep.
I'll make sure we get it posted.
Larry. Thank you very much. And hopefully we'll get Yelena's mic and camera fixed. So thank you very much for your time. And to our audience, thank you very much for joining us and your questions and comments. We'll see you all soon. Take care.